We are going to give people a few more minutes to drop in. And I am going to welcome some of you who dialed in at exactly the right minute now from a sunny Stockholm, actually. This week started out just raining cats and dogs. It was Monday was definitely the start of autumn in Stockholm. So I'm hoping that the weather is nice where you guys are as well. In the bottom right corner of your screen, you can find a chat functionality. If you are new to Livestorm, that's where you find it. And it would be lovely to see where you guys are dialing in from. So drop a comment in the chat. Hey, Michelle. One more hello from Stockholm, from Delphine. Oh, Netherlands. Welcome, Anna. One more from Stockholm. Hey, Niklas. And then we have Anne from London and Paul from London. Gothenburg being represented as well. Cool to see. Nice. We're about to get started now. So welcome to today's webinar on the topic of how to meet your customers or your stakeholders' requirements when it comes to reporting on carbon emissions and your targets. We are 3 people from Normative here today, and you'll get a more thorough introduction in a second, but I'll introduce myself first. My name is Jonna Lindell, and I work as a product manager here at Normative. It means that I, on a daily basis, meet with both our customers and with our climate strategists and continuously develop our platform and our offering so that we help our customers in the best possible way. And this session will be 45 minutes. It is being recorded, so you will actually have this recording shared with you after this call as well in a follow-up email. In the bottom right corner where you find a chat, you will also find a questions section where you can ask questions. Please do so throughout the section. As soon as a question pops up, you don't have to wait until the end where we have the Q&A, and we will answer them during the Q&A in the end of the call. But if we don't have time, we will get back to you. So please ask as many questions as you feel like. We will also share a post-webinar survey with you. It's going to be a quick 3-4 question survey where we ask you what you thought about this webinar and the content. And at Normative, we really love to develop and improve. So we would be super happy if you took a minute to answer the post-webinar survey at the end of this call. Nice. So introducing my colleagues from the Climate Strategy Advisory team, Anne and Delphine. We have a lot of interesting topics to cover here today, and you will be able to ask us questions directly in the chat at the end if you have anything in particular. If you are not familiar with Normative, I think some of you are, because I've seen the guest list. Some of you seem to already be reporting to your stakeholders in our software. But if you're not familiar, Normative is a company that has the goal to make known and reduce the sustainability impact of all economic activities on the planet, which is not a small feat. We do so by helping our customers with their entire net zero strategy. We are a platform and a solution that helps you with your carbon calculations, carbon accounting, as well as your reporting. And we also help our customers set targets and reduce their emissions. So we are with you on the entire journey towards net zero. And this means that our customers might also be a stakeholder of yours or a customer of yours, asking you to give them your carbon data so that they can actually reduce their own emissions. And that is something we're going to talk more about today. We firmly believe at Normative that if you can see your carbon emissions and understand your carbon emissions, that is the key to actually reducing your carbon emissions. So we are excited to walk you through this agenda today and these topics. We will start by talking about how to meet your customers' or stakeholders' demands when it comes to carbon reporting and why it is that they are asking you for all this data, what it means, and why do we do carbon accounting at all. We will then go into detail, a bit more detail, I will say. There is more detail to be had, but a bit more detail when it comes to measuring your own emissions. And then we're going to have a demo of the engagement module in the Normative platform, or you might be familiar with it as the survey that has been shared with you. And we'll wrap up with a Q&A. But without further ado, I'll hand it over to Anne.
Thank you. Great, yes. So as discussed, I'm going to be going over meeting your customers' carbon reporting requirements. So why is carbon accounting important to you and your customers? So many businesses, they're already tracking, they're reporting their emissions, and they're going to expect that you provide your emissions to them as well. There's lots of new laws coming out, such as CSRD, but there's also existing ones such as SECR in the UK, which require you to report your carbon emissions. Your emissions also contribute to your customers' scope 3 emissions. So that's their emissions that are in the value chain. So it's really important that they understand where the emissions are coming from. And it's also important to have accurate carbon calculations for compliance, maintaining customer relationships, and also securing new business opportunities. We're seeing this in the broader context where investors are willing to pay 10% more for a company with a positive ESG record. You can also see some reduction in costs through material efficiency or using less energy. And McKinsey has also said if you have a committed sustainability strategy, you can drive down costs by about 10%. Employees are also more likely to work for and stay with companies that have strong environmental policies. But we are seeing sort of the biggest driver is being that legislation piece currently as well in the whole world, but also the UK and Europe. We are seeing a lot of push from governments in terms of legislation. So you can see the ones on the left, which are appropriate for the UK, and the ones on the right are for the EU. And we are seeing a lot of push, especially from the CSRD initiative, to mean that lots of people are having to report their emissions. If you do want to see more about what legislation may be relevant to you, please look at our legislation tracker, which is on our website, which is going to give you more details about your location and size of your company to see what is relevant to you. In terms of the what and why of carbon accounting, so there's a huge human impact that we're seeing on the globe. So every single impact that we're seeing from transportation, manufacturing goods, power generation, mass consumption, and also deforestation is causing Earth's rising temperature and also causing massive issues with climate change. The result is that we are seeing that climate change is warming the Earth, and we are seeing that it's potentially going to be passing this 1.5 degree or 2 degree limit, which we're trying to cap the warming at. So this therefore means that we need to have exponential climate action to address this. The aim of trying to sort of reduce these emissions is the whole ethos of net zero. So this is where emissions of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere are balanced by removals over a specified period. So we're really aiming to reduce emissions as much as possible to be left with what's called the residual emissions, to then remove them with carbon removals. So in terms of carbon accounting, it's basically just the way of how we measure greenhouse gas emissions that an organization emits over a certain period of time. And the reason that we need to do this is it helps you understand where the emissions are coming from and what we need to do in order to reach net zero. What we would do is we need to get sort of a comprehensive carbon baseline or greenhouse gas inventory, which means that we can really focus on getting robust targets that are aligned to that 1.5 or 2 degree pathway, which we spoke about earlier. It also means that we can really focus on robust reduction strategies, looking at where the majority of your emissions are coming from. But it also means we can start the value chain engagement piece, which is why we're all here today, which is where we are trying to reach out to different companies to work out how your emissions feed into your customers. But I will now pass over to Delphine, who is going to go over the methodology and how you would actually measure your emissions.
Thank you so much, Anne. So let me take you through the steps of measuring your emissions. And greenhouse gas emissions are assessed following what we call the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol is essentially a carbon accounting standard that helps companies understand what business activities they have that will be leading to emissions and how to report on them. So kind of like financial accounting, carbon accounting essentially needs to follow a standard in order for reporting to be transparent and consistent between organizations that are reporting. And what does the Greenhouse Gas Protocol tell us? Well, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol divides emissions between Scope 1, 2, and 3. So Scope 1 refers to direct emissions that are occurring from sources that are owned or controlled by you as an organization, and that includes emissions from vehicles, on-site combustion of fossil fuels, as well as leakage in chemical production processes, for example. Scope 2 comes with indirect emissions from purchased energy. So that would be any electricity, cooling, heating, or steam that you might have, that you purchase in different sites that you have. And finally, there is Scope 3, which is the more complicated parts, which has all other indirect emissions that are occurring in the value chain of an organization. And those are all indirect emissions that are not already accounted for in Scope 2. So typically around 90% of emissions for every organization is contained within this Scope 3, which is all the value chain emissions that they have. And so how do we go about assessing your emissions? There are 3 different steps, and the first step is to map out your activities in your business operations and in your value chain that will actually generate emissions. Once you know what activities are generating these emissions, then you can collect data and quantify these business activities and calculate the associated emissions from these business activities. And finally, once you have that data, then you can share it with your customers in order to meet their demands through the normative net zero survey, for example. So I'll take you through each of the steps. So first, we need to start mapping your activities. And in order to map your emissions, you need to identify which sources of emissions under the various scopes in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol are applicable to you as an organization. So first is Scope 1, and as I mentioned, these are direct emissions occurring from your operations. So sources of emissions that you can have here is from, for example, fuel in vehicles that you have, mobile combustion, machinery that you operate, like stationary combustion. This could be boilers, for example, or leakage of gases that might happen in your locations. This can happen, for example, if you have refrigerants in AC units, for example. That would all be sources of emissions under Scope 1. Then you have Scope 2, which are your indirect emissions from purchased energy. And these emissions, as I mentioned, stem from electricity, heating, cooling, or even steam that you might purchase. And these are considered indirect because the energy you consume on in your sites are generally generated somewhere else by third parties. So you are indirectly generating these emissions. And Scope 2 can be reported under 2 different accounting methods, depending on how you estimate emissions from your electricity. You see here that we have what we call the market-based or the location-based approach. The market-based approach reflects the active choice that you have as a reporting company or as an organization to purchase renewable electricity. So, for example, if you purchased 100% renewable electricity in your electricity contracts from your suppliers, you would be able to have 0 emissions from your electricity. Meanwhile, the location-based approach reflects the emissions from the grid or the intensity of the emissions from the grid on which you are consuming energy. So this would be the more what you are actually generating, not taking into account you directly consuming renewable electricity. So these 2 different approaches are different ways of measuring your Scope 2. Then we have scope 3, where I mentioned is a bit more complicated. These are indirect emissions occurring in your value chain. And there are 15 different categories that you can see here that describe the business activities occurring in your value chain that might be generating emissions according to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And they are split into what we call upstream and downstream. And these scope 3 emissions include everything from the emissions from the products that you purchase all the way to the emissions from the disposal of products that you might have sold. So they are quite wide in terms of the emissions you need to be accounting for, as well as things like emissions from franchises you might have or investments you might have. So scope 3 requires quite a lot of tracking, quantifying, and measuring, and understanding these business activities. That's why it can be a bit of a challenging enterprise to collect scope 3, and that's why engines like Normative exist to help you on this journey. All right, so once you have quantified these business activities, you need to measure your emissions. And how do you do that? Well, there are two different data points that you want to have. You want to have input data, which is essentially information on how much of a certain business activity you've consumed, like the amount of liters that you have burned in a certain vehicle, as well as emission factors. Emission factors is essentially a value that allows you to convert your activity into a number of emissions. And there'll be different emission factors based on the activity type or the business activity you're trying to quantify. And some of them might be publicly available, while some emission factors come from paid databases. So once you have this input data and your emission factor, the calculation is quite easy, as you see it here. You essentially multiply how much of the business activity, like 500 liters of diesel, by the emission factor, so the emissions per liter. And that gives you a CO2 equivalent estimate of the emissions for that particular activity. Now, once you have that, the last step in our process is to share your total scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So once you've assessed emissions from all your business activities, you add them up and you give your customers the data on your scope 1, 2, and 3. And as Anne mentioned, why do you need to do that? Well, all the activities occurring in your customer's value chain are their scope 3. So essentially all of your activities are activities that are generating scope 3 emissions for your customer. And that's why they want to collect that data. And so now Jonna will show you how to share this data with your customers.
Yes, thank you, Delphine. I know at some point in there, Delphine said, when you get to this point, it's pretty easy to calculate. And I know that some of you have probably already undertaken the challenge to calculate your emissions and start reporting on them. Some of you might have done your corporate carbon footprint, including both scope 1, 2, and 3, but some of you might be just getting started. So I'm going to show you the survey now, what it looks like when a normative customer is asking for you to share your data. And the questions in the survey are set up in a way that regardless of where you are on your own journey, you can communicate where you are, but also what your intentions are. And I think that's really important to start with, that your customers or your stakeholders, they will not necessarily expect you to be fully done or, perfectly aligned with all their expectations and be the best in class when it comes to this. They are also fully aware that this is a journey that everyone is on. So there is a way for you to share the data you have while also signaling what your intentions for the upcoming year or the upcoming 2 years is. So let's start from that. And we are here to help you along the way, because reporting fatigue is a real thing. And this is what it will look like when you get a survey shared with you from a normative customer. In this case, the normative customer, which is fictional, is called Mars Manufacturing. It says here that they would like to add your company to their own value chain, meaning that they would love to know what your scope 1 and 2 emissions are, preferably also scope 3, because you are a part of their scope 3. And they need your emissions in order for them to understand how they are doing on their net zero journey. It will clearly state what the deadline for this is. In this case, we have been given plenty of time to complete this task. and it will pose me with two options. It will ask me if I would like to create a network account or if I would like to answer as a guest. And it clearly says here that we strongly recommend that you create a network account, but I just want to emphasize this one more time. Creating a network account, I think it will take you maybe a minute longer than answering as a guest at tops. But it gives you the ability to reuse any answers in a future survey. If they would ask you again next year, or if another normative customer would ask you, you can reuse your answers. You only have to write this once. You can also see all the answers you have shared previously, and you can update them. So if your stakeholder would reach out and say, hey, is this really correct? Or could you provide a bit more detail on this? You can always come back in, change your answer, and resubmit it. And then you can also develop your submission over time and use it again and again and again. And it leaves you also the opportunity to start drafting it, log out, and then come back again the next day or a few days later if there's some information you need to check with a colleague or so. So I cannot stress enough that we recommend that you create a network account. It will give you a lot of benefits instead of using the guest answer functionality. And before we move on, I know you're probably eager to see what the survey itself looks like. But before we go there, I just want to give you one more of my special tips. And that is that we have a lot of articles and a lot of knowledge resources that you can use when you're about to answer a survey. You can reach it from here. You can see this read more in the top right corner. You also see a few common questions here at the bottom. They will also take you to the same space, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. So I'm going to click here for read more about the engagement survey and bring you along to this next tab. So here is our knowledge library, you could call it, or there are articles here that can help you get started with this. The first one being just what is the survey and what will I be asked? So you can actually find an outline of the questions you will be asked here before you even get started, which is super smart, I think. There's also a glossary here. There's a FAQ, or frequently asked questions section, where you can find a lot of helpful things. So I highly recommend going through this if you are new to answering a normative survey or about your carbon emissions in general. And now to what the survey actually looks like. Let me bring you to this tab instead. Cool. So we are now at the stage that I have created a so-called network account. The things I need to fill in if I choose to create a network account is my personal details, so my email address and my name, so that Normative can connect me to my account. And then I will also, in this case, my company is called ConnectX AB. I've answered that my industry is in furniture making. I've answered the size of my company, where I am based, and I've also given a company identifier. This could be your website or a VAT number, for example. And then this survey is outlined in different parts below here. So there's one part that is about carbon emissions and the intensity of those emissions. We'll get to that. And there's one part that is about my plans to reduce my emissions. And then there's a section here at the end where I could share whatever I want actually with my stakeholder. But it could, for example, be if you have any ideas about how you would like to collaborate around reducing emissions. Cool. So we will start from the top. And before we start looking into the survey, I just want to make you aware that in the top right corner here, you can always contact our support. So if you do have any issues along the way, you can click here and shoot us a message, and we will help you along the way. And yeah, let's get started. This survey overview also gives you an indicator for approximately how long it will take to answer each part. It does, however, not include how long it takes to calculate your emissions. But we can start from here. So we are being asked here to submit our emissions for the year of 2022. And I start the survey, and it will start by asking if I know my emissions for this period, or if I don't, if I have it for another period. And in this case, we will go ahead with exactly this period. It will then try to specify the boundaries for the emissions that I have calculated. So is it for my company in particular, or am I part of a group company that I have a footprint for? And in this case, I will share for my company specifically. And it will then ask you, as I mentioned before, it will ask you where you're standing today, but also give you an opportunity to signal what your ambition is. Because your stakeholders, they're not only interested in knowing exactly what your data points are. A really important thing for them to know is where are you currently, but also what is your ambition level? How invested are you in reducing your own emissions? And they are mainly wondering that because your emissions are contributing to their emissions, right? So in some industries, we even see customers now choosing suppliers based on how mature they are when it comes to their work in ESG or in sustainability. So I highly encourage you to actually invest the time into signaling also your intentions when you're here. So in this case, I could answer that I only have scope 1 and 2, but that I'm intending to measure scope 3 within 2 years, for example. Or I'll go ahead and say that I have actually already concluded the calculations of all 3 scopes. So let's continue with that. Now I've finished the first part. It's super easy to click one of these to go back and edit. And I will take you through the second part, which is a bit longer. And remember now, any questions you get that pop up in your head while you're seeing this, just pop them in the chat and we'll make sure to answer them. For keeping this simple, I'm just gonna say that all of my emissions are 110%. It's gonna be a lot faster to fill. Not realistic at all, but you're gonna have to bear with me on this one. So it asks me about scope 1 and a percentage of, sorry, I was a bit quick there, and the percentage of fuel that I use that is biofuel. In the next step, it asks me for scope 2, and as Delphine mentioned, I could have used a method which is called location-based or market-based, or potentially both. So in an ideal world, you do know both, and you do share both. And for market-based emissions, I will also then be able to say what percentage of my market-based electricity in the year 2022 was renewable. If you at any point run into a question that you don't know, there's usually a way to signal that as well. When I get to say my scope 3 emissions, I also get to say for which categories I have calculated this. You remember Delphine showed you that they're downstream and upstream. So I get to indicate which ones of these I have already included in my scope 3. Really easy. And then it will ask me how I measured my emissions. So if you did it yourself, or in-house, you could signal that, but you could also then signal that you used another software or a consultant or other, and you're not obliged to answer this. But again, it could be an indicator of your ambition level. So please go ahead and share. In-house and consultants, so we use the mix. This is also one of the questions that might seem trivial, but this is also a way for you to signal your intentions. So it will ask if I've published my emissions openly, and it will actually ask the same about targets when we come to that section. So, and the same with if it's been audited. This also tells your stakeholder a bit about your ambition level. So this is in no way them trying to quiz you, but they would really like to know where you stand currently. And you can then say that you're planning to have them audited in the near future. And here we could then also describe that our method is aligned with the greenhouse gas protocol, for example. Cool. That is the heftiest part of the survey. That's probably what's going to take you the most time to fill in. It also will ask about the intensity. And in this part, you will be asked to either share intensity that you have calculated yourself. You can usually find it in your sustainability report if you have not been part of calculating those figures yourself, or it will actually help you calculate your intensity. And we do so by two different metrics, you could say. We do it over revenue, so an intensity, a financial intensity. We also do it over employees. I see we are starting to run out a bit of time, so I'm not going to take you through this because I would like to show you the target section actually. So except then asking you for your actual emissions and how you came to that conclusion, if they've been audited and what the intensity is, your stakeholder will also ask you about your targets and what you're planning to do to reduce your emissions, as that will contribute to them reducing their Scope 3 emissions. And that looks like this. Let's get started. So it just starts by asking if I have set any targets, or if you're in the process, or if you plan to do so in the near future. And in this case, we have set targets, and they are for my company specifically, so not on a parent company or group level, and they are for me specifically. And in this case, it will ask if they are science-based targets, or other publicly disclosed, or internal targets. If you have not gotten started on your science-based targets journey yet, that is also something that Normative helps companies with, something our customers are working a lot with. You can also use this. And then you can describe what targets you have set here. And it will then ask you to provide target year. So you can add both your short-term goals and your long-term goals. So for example, by 2025, I would like to reduce, and I can add multiple here. So I can add one Scope 1 goal, and then I can add a Scope 2 goal, which is a bit more aggressive. And I can also then choose to have a scope, all 3 scopes by 2030. You see how this is working out. And we can also then have a more long-term goal if we want to. So I see here, it will look something like this when I'm done. So if I needed to go back and change any of these, I can do so here. And this is also really neat, actually. You have the deadline always at the bottom here, and you can see a progress bar on how close you are to being done. And when I have filled in all the sections needed, in this case, more information about my base year and what actions I'm taking to reduce, and maybe if I have any ideas for collaboration, and the section that I skipped earlier about intensity, I can go ahead and share my answers. And I think that was the lion part of this. Cool. So I will stop sharing now, and I think we're right on time for Q&A.
Yes, I think there is a question in the chat. Is there something like simplification rules for SMEs, or is that something which can be seen from a materiality perspective? Just thinking about own suppliers that might not be able to willing or provide such data. So in terms of SMEs, obviously these will probably make up sort of the long tail of your emissions in your scope 3. So when we work with customers, we tend to say to kind of get this information maybe from slightly larger customers or larger suppliers, because that will actually impact the reduction journey that you're having, rather than focusing on the long tail. That's not to say that SMEs shouldn't measure their emissions and fill out the survey, because obviously we know that it's quite a lot of work and resource to kind of do that. But there are quite a lot of good resources on the SME Climate Hub website, which we can put the link in the chat, which means that they can also get started on their journey, because yes, they are SMEs, but as we know, CSRD is going to probably be covering every single company, in the next sort of 5-10 years. So we need to make sure that everybody can measure, and then hopefully that means that there's a little bit more grace period in terms of that. But we always encourage every company to measure their emissions.
Fantastic. We have another question from Mark as well. Mark is asking if, when creating an engagement survey, how can you ensure that the survey has not already been sent to that supplier if you work in a very complex global organization where different divisions may use the same supplier? And I would say, in essence, that the answer to that question is no, you cannot make sure currently, unless you are actually sharing the same platform or the same normative solution as your global organization. However, that's where the network account comes into play, because if you have a shared supplier and they have already been asked by another part of your organization or a parent company or similar, if they created a network account, it's going to be a really simple exercise for them to share the same answers with you. But currently, there is no way for you as a normative customer to know if another organization that you're not linked to has shared the same survey, unfortunately. But there would be if you actually did share the same normative account.
And we have another question that has come in. So how do I, as an organization, get started on my own Scope 3 measurements? And as I mentioned earlier, Scope 3 is a little bit more complicated to measure than maybe Scope 1 and 2. That's because of the many business activities that can lead to emissions in Scope 3. So when I kind of showed how to go about doing that, one key thing is mapping out what are your relevant business activities that are leading to emissions in Scope 3. And really being able to quantify these. And this is what makes it more complicated. So the difficulty with Scope 3 is quantifying these business activities in Scope 3. Do you have the data available? How do you measure these various business activities? And then having the right emission factors to be able to apply to these various business activities. So at Normative, that's why we have 12 different databases with 220,000 emission factors that can be used to cover all of your business activities. And that's why a lot of companies are using software solutions to be able to calculate Scope 3 and help you on this journey.
Nice. We have another one here as well. My customer has asked me for PCFs, that is product carbon footprints, I believe, in this context, via normative. How do I submit that? Yes, if you paid close attention to detail while I demoed, there was actually no mention of product carbon footprints in the part I demoed, but there is a way for normative customers to ask you for product carbon footprints as well, or EPDs, or any document that is outlining an LCA that you have done for your product. It's a common trend that we're seeing now. Many of our customers would like to move from just general emissions data and work more with product level data. So if a normative customer has asked you to provide PCFs or EPDs, the survey will look very similar to what I showed you in the demo, but instead of having text fields that you fill in, it will be a combination of a text field where you supply the name of the product and the emissions per product, but also then attach a file, which could be an EPD or a PCF document or anything else really that that shows the validity of the product carbon footprint that you're sharing. And they are asking you that simply because they want to use that data to refine their own calculations in Normative and make it even more detailed, and give them greater opportunities to reduce.
We've had another question. Can you provide more information about your methodology? Yes, so we do actually have a white paper which is available on our website, which goes into much more detail about all of the methods that we use. But just briefly, we are completely aligned to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol in how we measure your emissions. So if you are ever audited or anything like that, you know that you've got like a really nice and robust methodology behind all the calculations that have been done.
Nice. Are there any more questions for me or for Delphine or for Anne before we start wrapping this session up? Give it a few more seconds. And thank you, Michelle, for sharing the white paper that Anne referred to in the chat as well. You have a lot of links in the chat that you can click now, actually, to further enhance your knowledge in carbon accounting and reporting. It seems like there are no further questions. There is a way for you to get in touch with us through Livestorm now. And if you click that, we will reach out to you if you're interested in asking more or knowing more or book a demo with us. And we look forward to send you this recording in a follow-up email. And we hope you enjoyed today's session. It was an honor to have you all here today. Thank you so much for dialing in. And thank you, Anne and Delphine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.